Well, welcome to the first Q&A of our 7 Factors of Enlightenment retreat. And let's go with our first question, Pia.
Question is from Kyle in Kansas City, Missouri, United States. How rare is enlightenment for lay people in our current time compared to in the time of the Buddha? Is there a characteristic of different eras in time that make enlightenment more possible versus more difficult to achieve?
It's hard to get statistics on this. We'll have to do blood tests on people to get find out whether there's enlightened or not. Just kidding. Certainly in the time of the Buddha, in the suttas, you see that it is quite common that lay people attain enlightenment, and they seem to do it by the boatload. They specifically say, in this village, there are 500 sotapannas, or first stage of enlightenment. And then a group comes to visit the Buddha, and during a discourse, during a talk by the Buddha, so you can imagine, during a teatime with Ajahn Sona, you, in the middle of a sentence, you attain some stage of enlightenment. This seemed to be a common occurrence in the time of the Buddha, and people attained various stages of enlightenment. Some monastics from other traditions who had been practicing extreme ascetic practices, etc., came and listened to a talk, and they attained full enlightenment. They attained what's called arahantship. So this happened in a blink of an eye. It's quite hard to imagine how this took place. Certainly, some people would attribute it to the Buddha himself as an absolutely charismatic individual with enormous clarity and persuasive capacity, riveting their attention, and the person attains enlightenment. The other explanation is that people who happen to be born at the time of the Buddha, it's not an accident that they're born at the time of the Buddha. Remember, in the West, when we read things, we're coming from a culture that has no ideas about prior existence. And so you're either from a materialist culture where you don't have a prior existence and you don't have a post-life existence. And so you're trying to explain things in the Buddhist texts which only make sense within a rebirth context. Even if you're coming from a religious background, say in the West, a Christian background, the Christians don't have a previous life, but they have a future eternal life. So Buddhism has a prior life and an afterlife. And those people who attained awakening in the presence of the Buddha are said to have been practicing perhaps for lifetimes. And that's why they're born at that time in that place. So they're very fortunate in encountering a living Buddha. So this is one of the explanations that's given, because as time goes by, and there seems to be some prediction by the Buddha of this as well, that the Dhamma, the essential, straightforward Dhamma that the Buddha is teaching in the early Pali Canon, will decline in a sense that new teachings will come up that will be confusing and variations upon it, and that it's what's called counterfeit Dhamma will appear. And this is apparently a method for, in wars between countries at the time, one way to undermine the economy is to distribute counterfeit money. And then people stop trusting the means of exchange. And so the economy can fall apart. This, in fact, reminds me of this present cryptocurrency thing. where nobody knows what's real anymore. Counterfeit ideas come in. And this undermines people's confidence in currency itself, etc. But because teachings attributed to the Buddha, we would call fake Buddha quotes, are floating around everywhere, there's much confusion. Which is the authentic teaching? Which is, there are gurus, fake gurus, and all kinds of stuff around. And so confusion reigns. And the Buddha predicted this. This is what was going to happen. So we can attribute it to a decline in the number of people, lay people who get enlightened, partly because there are all kinds of forms of Buddhism as well that discount the primary right views. So if you discount the very idea of rebirth and karma, and you discount the idea that the aspiration to nibbana or nirvana is that a human can purify the emotional structure to the extent that they're free from suffering, emotional suffering. If you don't have those ideas, you're misdirected from the very get-go. And there is no way you're going to arrive at the right destination if you don't have the right map. So what is it some sort of magic where the Dhamma is extinguished? Many Buddhist cultures have taken up that idea, and they become very pessimistic at certain times in their history. But the Buddha himself said that wherever the Four Noble Truths are found, there you can find people of the first, second, third, and fourth stages of enlightenment. Where the Four Noble Truths are not found, then you won't find the people who have become enlightened. So what is required again and again is to not ask how many people are getting enlightened. It's to ask, do I have the authentic core teachings of the Buddha? Do I understand what composes the enlightened mind? So that's why I'm giving this whole retreat on 7 factors which constitute the enlightened mind. And these factors, by the way, are wildly idealistic and optimistic. In normal psychology, and if you consult psychologists and so forth, they don't even dream that people can achieve this quality of inner life. So this is why you have to have a very high projection of the possibilities of human emotional purification and attainments. And you have to have a thorough understanding of the Four Noble Truths. And by the way, those Four Noble Truths are fully entangled and imply both rebirth and karma. And when you separate those things, as some schools that use the words of the Buddha, some sort of meditative schools that want to cleanse the teachings of the Buddha of those 2 factors, karma and rebirth, you will not find the motive power to drive one to enlightenment. You won't find clear understanding of the central meaning of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. So no one on the planet can really know how many people at this time have achieved some level of the classical 4 stages of enlightenment. And we can't possibly figure out how many people attained it at the time of the Buddha either. But it appears to be, I think by consensus of well-informed, long-term, truly practicing monastics who have a good knowledge of the Pali Canon and a good knowledge of meditation, that it appears that at this time that there are certainly, it's rarer than at the time of the Buddha to attain enlightenment. I don't think that truly experienced meditation monks in the major schools of Theravada Buddhism deny the possibility of enlightenment at this time. There are countries, whole countries, that at certain periods of time become very pessimistic. The rumor goes around that no one is getting enlightened anymore. But at the same time, in another country with an equally rich Theravada tradition, it turns out that there are thought to be numbers of people who are attaining enlightenment at this time. So the only way to thoroughly look at this is that it's all you can do is try and put the sociology numbers aside, trying to determine how many this and that. It's an impossible task to sort this out. But one should just go ahead with one's practice in a very sincere way. But one honestly should say, am I practicing in the context of what the Buddha is talking about in a universe of rebirth and karma and the Four Noble Truths? Because I'm not likely to have the proper fuel to have right view if I don't have those as a held conviction, or at least not in denial of those things. So that's an answer to this. And this is a perplexing question that people have and ask again. If they're practicing Buddhism, they can have this question for decades at a time. Is anybody really getting enlightened, etc.? So you can see that the best thing to do is just to go ahead and try to find the authentic teachings, the early teachings, being, in my opinion, the most authentic, and then proceeding along the line with that. Okay, Pia, let's go to the next question.
Next question is from the live chat from Echnoderm. Dear Venerable, one of the factors of jhana and 7 factors of awakening is joy. How can we experience joy during anapanasati meditation without losing focus on the breath?
Yes, a good question. And your concept is that mindfulness of breathing is somehow in contradiction to the experience of joy. And so then this, sometimes breath meditation and mindfulness meditation is taught like that, where you are to dismiss or ignore emotional states altogether and just regard with objective indifference the simple experience of the breath. This is an entirely fictional model of Buddhist teachings. Obviously, as you see, and maybe this is why I am presenting these 7 factors of enlightenment, joy is intrinsic to true focus and true mindfulness and concentration. It's an intrinsic emotion which is not only not in opposition, but is supportive and an aspect of thoroughgoing meditation, including on the breath. And of course, later on in these talks, and I won't give away the future talks, but we will get to what's called samadhi, which is one of the 7 factors of enlightenment. And there, the first jhana, the first level of this deep concentration, the emotional quality is joy. And it's achieved through breath meditation. And you cannot achieve the first jhana, the first level of deep concentration, without experiencing joy. It's intrinsic to the experience. So it's not only it's not a distraction, it's intrinsic to the experience. And one, in fact, may suggest it to oneself, induce it, welcome it in, and it will help your breath meditation. The idea of this dry kind of, as if a machine is watching you breathe or something like this idea is kind of a weird aberration of breath meditation practice. It is some sort of alien import into the teachings. Perhaps somebody has spent too much time reading what is called Abhidhamma, or it's kind of like a nuclear physicist going out on a date with somebody and looking at them as if they're all mostly atomic particles, and most of them is space between the atomic particles. This is an inappropriate use overlay on a date, and it's also an inappropriate overlay onto breath meditation. Buddhist history shows that from time to time whole schools of monks get very carried away with philosophical ideas that are completely out of the context of the Buddha's aim, which is very humanistic. It is to do with this very human experience called suffering, which babies have and grandpas have and teenagers have and all kinds of people have, and we know perfectly well what it is. And it's not a philosophy. It's much more direct and human than that. And that's the big problem in life. And abstract philosophies don't particularly they don't answer that. So this breath meditation is a means to the end of this suffering. And what is experienced as joy is relief from unwholesome type of emotions, and should be welcomed in. Yeah.
Our next question is from Johning in Twickenham, Middlesex, UK. Regarding the path to enlightenment, quote, embody the real Dhamma without existing, unquote. This feels like the destination of practice. Context is the observation I have been pondering. The 5 khandhas exist, but are not real. Dharma is real, but does not exist. Envy, using the literal meaning of exist, in the Latin existere, to stand out. I am trying to find a way of expressing what I do not wish to... Let me start that again. I am trying to find a way of expressing that I do not wish to exist, but ultimately want to be real, being Dhamma. Please advise.
Yes, there is no problem to be solved about not existing. What we refer to as not existing is a wrong notion of the self. So it's like it's no problem to live on a spherical earth. You don't have to transition from the flat earth to the spherical earth. You were never on a flat earth. You will always be on a spherical earth. There is no elimination of a flat earth. It's always been spherical. There is no elimination of an I. There never was an I there to begin with. It's a notion which does not bear up under scrutiny. And of course, it's just a shocking realization that you've had an assumption about things all along that was incorrect. And in childhood, you have all of these crazy ideas that it turn out to be wrong. I actually had an experience where a woman who was raised in Laos and never went to school. She stayed on the farm, and eventually, when she was 18 or something, she ended up getting married to an Australian fellow, and just being taken away out of her farming, uneducated background to Australia in an astonishing event, and just became his wife and lived at, and she began to watch television to help her with language and so forth. And one day on the television, they were talking about the Earth and showed pictures of it floating in space, and she had never heard that the Earth was spherical. Nobody told her that it was anything much about it. She just assumed it was flat. It was pretty obvious. How else would it be, And she was telling me this moment. She was 23 years old, and when her husband came home, she just said, "Do you know that the Earth it's round?" And he said, "Yes, dear, of course." She said the transitions that she went through, the shock and the amazement that she went through. It was wonderful to hear this because she was completely, convinced of the new idea of the earth, but it just was shocking to her. So funny, and she could laugh about it now too. But how many times in our lives have we got new ways of seeing things? So this is with the nature of the self, and nothing really happens. It's just a misunderstanding about the nature of reality and our internal reality. And, you can see how it happens. Everybody's been calling us a noun from the day we were born, John. John, hello, John. John, all the way along. And then you start somewhere in your later life, your 20s, you've been presuming there's a John there, and then suddenly you come across some odd book or some strange teaching that says, this guy John is not actually there. There isn't one of them. You got to examine that idea because it's a peculiar idea. So yeah, we're bound to. It's a hard one to grasp. It's much easier to grasp the round earth, the spherical earth, than it is to grasp the absence of a real, unchanging sense of self. And so, yeah, you should be patient with the idea, and it's just soaking in little. We're dissolving some very brittle and resistant kind of rust in our system. It's not easy to get rid of the sense of self. But yeah, you just patiently apply the cleansers and the truth and the repetition, and that's how it fades away. It fades away. So not to perplex yourself with too much elaborate language about the khandhas being empty or Dhamma being existent but not visible, etc. Actually, the Dhamma is visible always, and it is also called akaliko or timeless. So it's always visible. The reality is always visible, that there is no enduring substance to anything, humans included, and the world around us. And maybe this is the modern scientific paradigm. It's obviously when they run the Hadron Collider, nothing, it keeps getting smaller and smaller little particles, and then they turn into wavicles, and they turn into some sort of quantum bubbles and vanish into energy fields, and so that's the way the modern world is. It is mind-blowing when you try to think about it too much, but apparently that's how it is right now, and it appears as, desks and chairs and people walking around, and that's the underlying reality behind it. So we aspire to that in the scientific area. We aspire to the ultimate truth. We are investigating down to the smallest thing we can inquire into, because we want to know. But it's not as relevant, not as meaningful to human life as the internal investigation into why we are out of sync with reality, why we have cognitive dissonance with the events of reality, and why we can't accept it, why we suffer. Suffering is the resistance to this lack of being in harmony with the truth of the way things are. So, hope that helped a little bit.
Next question is from the live chat from Adichita in Alberta, Canada. Dear Ajahn, practicing after your talk, I could settle down the mind to a state where discursive thinking stopped. What helped me get there was to reflect that I could die at the next breath, and I would think dying is like this. What are your thoughts? Is meditation practicing on how to prepare for a good death?
Yes. And not only the Buddha has said this, there's various people in history. We must, I think it's Montaigne, the essayist from whatever, 16th century or 17th century, said we must practice dying many times to do it well but once. Or maybe it was Thoreau. Or maybe it was Thoreau quoting Montaigne or something. And I'm sure it's a theme that occurs again and again, and not just in Buddhism, but in other religions as well, that really you have to practice death. You have to get realistic. So this is why we have fire drills, and we practice for emergencies. When I was growing up, we had to hide under our desks because if the nuclear bomb went off, you'd be completely protected by the wooden desk above you at 7 years old. And when you came out, all those kids who didn't get under their desk, they flunked that test. And anyway, you have to practice your mortality again and again, because this is what drives humans to another level of reality. This drives you to a transcendent level. If mortality is a fact, and by the way, I think you ask most adults or even kids if you die, if people die, if they're going to die, and they'll say yes, but they may not really be sincere in it. They don't really mean it. Because when the biopsy comes to them, when the news is announced, they seem to have a lot of trouble with that. There is a short story by Tolstoy, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, I think it is. And it opens, he's a clerk or some sort of bourgeois office administrator or something like this, and he has got a very serious illness, but he does not accept the fact that he's actually going to die. And Tolstoy has a quote from a logic book. He says, Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. And when Ivan Ilyich read that, he thought, yes, Socrates is mortal, but I'm not. He failed to grasp the logic extension to himself. So he was in. It's a story about denial and how this plays out, and most people are in that sense of denial. So we really have to practice in a very serious way to disarm ourselves, disarm our own protective qualities, and this can be done in meditation. This is why a lot of people don't meditate. It's why a lot of people stay busy all the time as well, because part of the busyness is the avoidance of the absolute reality that, in the end you just die. and then what to make of this? Is it meaningful or meaningless? Is it just you're born, you die, and it's all been a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, but signifying nothing, as Shakespeare said. So, as you can see, I'm quoting from all kinds of sources all through history, because this is one of the central issues of humanity, of brighter humanity, and we have to learn from this, and we have to work on it. And so, yes, reflecting on mortality, doing breath meditation, all of this is necessary to rehearse our own death as well, and to reduce it's not just to make us nervous or despondent or anything like this. It's actually the opposite, to relieve ourselves and be in touch with reality, and at the same time in touch with the enlightenment factors, which are joy and ease. But I won't give ahead. I won't give out what I'm about to say about joy and serenity in the factors of enlightenment. No, you didn't hear that. So let's go back to Pia. Yeah.
Next question is from Upasaka Jotika from Elmshorn, Germany. Dear Ajahn Sona, in the talk you mentioned that the mind of an enlightened person is switching back and forth between joy and serenity. Is it possible for a person who has not yet perfected the 7 factors of enlightenment or is not an arahant to experience such a state, i.e., for a moment or a short period of time? If so, how should one deal with such a state?
Yes, the nascent factors of enlightenment, the just whispers of factors, can appear to the unenlightened person. You get little hints and tastes, intimations of the sense of freedom. It's been like a prisoner who is in a maximum security prison. Once in a while, a breeze comes through the bars of the window, and they get a little breath of fresh air, or a shaft of sunshine comes through there. And it's the same breeze that a free person experiences all the time, and the same shaft of sunlight that is available to a free person all the time. But the person is still in prison, although you get little glimpses and whiffs of it. So yes, indeed, and much should be made about that. The aspiration to get out of that cell and walk around in the sunshine and the fresh air should be very strong, and then you should get good advice about how to get out of that cell that is loaded with despair sometimes, and anger, and the opposite of the 7 factors of enlightenment, which are primarily the 5 hindrances of greed and anger, sloth, agitation, and doubt. And to give yourself a break from that, a holiday from that, and the possibility of a little intuition or even a direct experience, not just for a moment, but extended periods of time. And that can happen in meditation, where you have good conditions, supportive conditions, and you've set it up right, and temporarily, in a little bit of samadhi, you get a little bit of samadhi or a little bit of relief from the 5 hindrances, and then you can start to actually have a little taste of liberation. Yeah, it doesn't last because it's not strong enough. Your faculties and your control is not strong enough, but you have had some little brief experiences of it, which should be very encouraging and thoroughly make you want to go there into that state without ever regressing from it. Yes, let's go on.
Next question is from the live chat from Trace in Las Vegas, Nevada, United States. Why are the 7 factors so close to the Eightfold Path? Is it a revision?
No, it's not a revision. It should be thought of as a kind of a magnifying glass over the last 3 factors of the Eightfold Path. So the right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration are amplified, and you see it specifically. 3 of them are specifically in the 7 factors. That is, right mindfulness is the first factor. Then energy, which is again equivalent to the 6th factor, right effort. And then samadhi is specifically in there as well. Samadhi is the 8th factor of the Eightfold Path and the 6th factor of the 7 factors of enlightenment. And so those are specifically, and the other factors in there are what is taking place in this upper last 3 factors. Those last 3 factors are what's called samadhi and panya, samadhi and wisdom. The Eightfold Path, is quite often divided into 3 things: sila, which is virtuous behavior of body and speech, and then samadhi, which is the refined activities of the mind, and then panya is wisdom, the insights. And so samadhi and panya are kind of under under the magnifying glass in the seven factors. So the Buddha just lays these frameworks over aspects of the path. And this is just the mark of a good teacher. You don't just start in grade 1 with algebra. You start with, 1 and 1 is 2. And you don't even start with 1 plus 1 is 2. You start with one apple, and then there's another apple. And how many apples are there now? There's 2 apples. You don't even start with abstract ideas like one what? Children have, it's pretty, we function abstractly, but it takes a while to get there. You can't just say one anything. It's a weird notion, because a child only says an apple or an orange or something like that they understand that, but not just one. One what? And then we work up to algebra and so forth, and that's where I stopped. Let me out of here. I want to be outside playing in the forest. So this systems that the Buddha has, where he overlays structures on parts of the path, parts of the teaching, so that you can get clear about certain aspects and focus on certain aspects. So the seven factors would not be an introductory talk for people who have never heard of Buddhism before. I would start with other elements, and I wouldn't bring it into an introduction for kids. I would talk about the precepts of not killing, frogs and insects, or not lying about things and so forth. It's for the higher mind, the practiced mind, the thoughtful mind, who are familiar with Buddhist ideas. And of course, what I've done is a whole series, something like 250 videos on YouTube now, going from the very basics up to this more elaborate and more expounding on these higher things. But I allow that people can go back over and get the basics first. But if they jump in at seven factors, they maybe have jumped in over their heads or into the deep end. They may not be able to swim around in these ideas, but I expect that many of the people who are watching are pretty seasoned Buddhist explorers. Some are meditators. And I also bring this out because some of the schools of Buddhism are really a little bit off the main topics. They don't really understand the qualities of the enlightened mind, and so they have techniques and schools of meditation which are really not actually the mainline teachings of the Buddha. So this is why I bring this in. And it does incorporate into the Eightfold Path, but it's not a new version of the Eightfold Path. It's just a magnified version of the last 3 factors.
Ajahn, our next question is from Anonymous in Orlando, Florida, United States. Can we work on developing these 7 enlightenment factors without attaining right view? Or is this a futile exercise and possibly an ego trip before developing right view? Is arriving at the right view the first step before attempting to do anything else?
No, you can start almost anywhere, and this is what typically in the West, many people have not started at all with right view of things. They come to Buddhism as a therapy, or like a lark, or a cool thing, or maybe they misunderstood the whole idea. It's about peace and love, and that sounds good, except that it is, of course, about peace and love. But they come to it with all kinds of, and maybe they start meditating, and then they find out that it's really hard to meditate. It's almost impossible to meditate. My mind's all over the place. And then it starts to get deeper, and then they think, oh, maybe I better change my behavior. That's what's getting in the way. And so they discover sila, which is the basis of development of mind. You have to behave yourself in body, speech, and mind, and then you will have more success with meditation. And of course, then they're importing modern psychological ideas, which are perhaps based in materialist science or something like that, and they're overlaying that on Buddhism and reinterpreting Buddhism for a modern world and all this kind of stuff. So that, and eventually they might find that they're getting nowhere, and they're left with a annihilationist kind of view of life, and they do a bit of meditation, and it's hard to keep up, and what's the point that you're going to just die anyway? And so then they might explore right view. So, so they might come to right view as the last thing, and that changes their perspective on meditation and all kinds of things. So you can approach from different ways, but eventually, yes, in order to have full development of the 7 factors of enlightenment, you must have right view of things, a right view. And I won't go extensively into right view. Certainly, in my talks on on right YouTube, you will find talks on right view. And so, yeah, you shouldn't necessarily think that like the factors of enlightenment may arise to some degree in some way, and they'd be very tempting and very encouraging without right view. So mindfulness can arise to some extent. Joy can arise, spiritual joy can arise, serenity can arise, even samadhi. You can actually have the deep samadhi, but it won't be informed by right view, so it won't issue in right wisdom. So that's a brief answer to that question.
Our next question is from the live chat from Doug in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I have some skill in identifying and abandoning the 5 hindrances when they arise, but I am unclear about how to move into the 7 factors of enlightenment. As a beginner, what is the easiest way to move into wholesome, positive mind states and sustain them via the 7 factors of enlightenment?
Well, you are accomplishing the first 2 tasks of right effort there. Under the 6th factor of the Eightfold Path is called right effort, and it has 4 parts to it. Boy, we really got the numbers flying around. 6 this, 8 that, 7 of this, 5 of this. But, hey, this is, you get used to it after a while. Anyway, the 6th factor of the Eightfold Path is right effort. And under right effort, there are 4 kinds of right effort. And the first 2, the prevention and removal of unwholesome mental states, apply to these 5 hindrances. The 5 hindrances are greed, hatred, sloth, agitation, and doubt. And you are to prevent and remove them whenever you spot them with your mindfulness. Whenever you see them, they are not to be tolerated. They are to be prevented and removed, etc. This is a sadly neglected teaching of one of the core teachings of the Buddha, which is sadly neglected. You will get all kinds of mindfulness courses and everything where you're supposed to just watch everything. Don't interfere, just watch and watch and watch. No. It's in the 6th factor. You're supposed to prevent and remove, not just watch. And so that's the 5 hindrances. Now, the second part of right effort, parts 3 and 4 of right effort, are the cultivation, bringing into existence wholesome mental states. And what would those wholesome mental states be? Primarily the 7 factors of awakening. And when they are brought into existence, you are to maintain them and deepen them and sustain them and not let them just drift away. You're not just to watch them, you're to actually cultivate them. Systematically cultivate your garden. And these are the 7 factors. Now, what the nice thing, how do you make the transition from the 5 hindrances, which must be let go, and or overcome, and the 7 factors, which must be welcomed in and brought to fruition? How do you do this? Well, what happens actually is that if you can just stop the weeds, the 5 hindrances, you're already going to provide good soil for the arising of the 7 factors, and they should actually start to pop up rather spontaneously. So when you're not oppressed and harassed, say a child is got a bad parents and difficult life, family life, and they're sad and everything because everybody's shouting at them and hitting them and stuff, and never, always criticizing them. And then they get out of that place, and nobody's around that harasses them, and they fall in with a group that praises them and says nice things and that gives them food and everything. And then you will see that that's kind of, without even trying, that child will become happier, because that's the nature. It's not a child, it's mind. And this is the universal nature of mind. When mind is not harassed, now this can even a dog's mind or a cat's mind. If you mistreat a dog and make it fearful and everything, it is not happy. But then you watch all these YouTube videos about dogs who have been taken out of bad places and put in nice. It takes a while, little transition. Pretty soon they start to play, and they enjoy, and they return affection and everything. Look at that. Is that a dog? No, it's a mind. It's a human mind. It's an animal mind. No animal wants pain. They don't. The mind avoids pain and suffering and rejoices in freedom from that naturally. So this is one of the things the Buddha says. The mind is in its nature luminous and shiny, but is shadowed by the defilements, the harassments of the 5 hindrances. But if the harassments are not there, then the mind becomes luminous again, because that's its actual nature. So water has a certain specific nature, H2O, and when you mix things into it, it can be muddied, it can be distorted in ways, but it is intrinsically just H2O. It's pure water. And when the other things are filtered out, then it returns to this luminous state. So the 7 factors of enlightenment are basically intrinsic to the unharassed mind, and they start to emerge from that. But you really have to spend a lot of time, because the 5 hindrances are the food of ignorance. How do we stay ignorant of how to be well, happy, peaceful? We're ignorant of that. And what is the food of that counter information, that stuff that keeps us ignorant? It is the 5 hindrances. The more you practice those 5 hindrances, the more ignorant you become. And when you stop feeding it those 5 hindrances, then the mind returns to its more luminous state, which is its natural state. And so you starve it of the 5 hindrances, and you feed it with generosity, kindness, clarity, and you feed it by association with people who are generous and kind and clear and luminous, and you've now been adopted into a new family that treats you nicely. And then pretty soon you start to feel, you return to your proper heritage, your proper inheritance. And I think it suddenly occurs to me that a lot of the novels by Dickens, Oliver Twist and various novels. It's all about little boys who are like abandoned in the streets and treated badly, and then they find their way finally into a kindly family and so forth, and they flourish and they realize the beauty of human life. And this is a very good example. It's very human. See, this is not a philosophical exercise. This is a very human exercise, and it's well expressed by certain artists in history in terms of writers and people with deep insight into human nature. Okay, I think we have time for probably one more question. Yeah.
Our final question is from Bodhipala here at Birken, British Columbia, Canada. One iteration of the four efforts defines the third, Bhavana Padana, as, quote, developing the 7 factors of enlightenment which rely on seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, and incline towards liberation, unquote. What does it mean that the 7 factors, quote, rely on seclusion, dispassion, and cessation?
Yeah, that's a good connection between these 4 padanas, these 4 efforts, which, remember at the beginning of this description of the 7 factors of enlightenment, I mentioned something called 37 requisites of enlightenment, and there's 4 of them that are these special kind of efforts, and this is the third of those. So you see the 7 factors of enlightenment as a form of right effort, of a special kind of effort, and seclusion is fairly straightforward. Seclusion of, you need quiet time to think. You need quiet time away from the hustle and the bustle and the sharp elbows in the elevators and you need that in order to refine and clarify your life. You need some withdrawal and time to yourself and quiet time. And so this is seclusion. And then dispassion is that the very thought of this withdrawal into a quiet place for somebody who is full of passions, like worldly passions, is a horrifying thought. A quiet time is a horrifying thought for somebody who's riddled with passionate emotions, anger and greed and so forth. The last thing they want to do is have some quiet time. So we have to settle down these worldly passions, and we have to have some quiet time to think. And then we move towards this relinquishment, letting go of things that are just, in fact, turns out to be just burdens at the end, just way too much stuff, ideas about ourselves and the world and material things and so forth that just are actually an impediment to our well-being. So this is the natural process which you could describe as the 7 factors of enlightenment, or the process of the 7 factors of enlightenment, and they're intrinsically hooked together with these characteristics as well. Now, I would like to say that our question and answer is ended for today, but there will be another one tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific time. And tonight, in 2 hours from now, at 7 p.m. Pacific, there will be a Dhamma talk on the 7 factors of enlightenment by yours truly. And so this is the system until the 31st of December. So we have 5 talks to go and 4 more question and answers to go. So join us for the voyage along the way.